Miss Bishop called me the way she used to call Roll, last name first, no hello, and said, "Brody, somebody drove a truck through the class of 1985 last night. Bring your brushes." I was up a ladder in my shop with a quill brush in my teeth, and it took me a second to remember that in Miss Bishop's world, that sentence had an address. Everybody from my town knows the fence. Lenore Bishop taught senior English at Harmon High for 41 years, and every June, for 41 years, her graduating students walked the 4 blocks to her little house on Willard Avenue and painted their own names on her picket fence. 1 picket per kid. Your own hand. Your own year. No exceptions and no do-overs. 4 decades of signatures, 600 feet of them, wrapping her corner lot like the town's ledger. The parade passes it every year. Tourists photograph it. The last picket is dated the year she retired, and the fence has been holding its breath ever since. I know the fence better than most, because I'm on it. Class of '04, 17 years old. The failing kid from shop class, whose lettering she spotted on the corner of a desk and drafted, on the spot, to repaint the weathered years. First commission of my life. I paint signs now. Gold leaf, hand lettering, the trade everybody said was dead. I owe that trade to a woman who once handed me a 1-inch brush like it was a diploma, which is the bitter joke of this whole story. Because the reason I was back in town at all was the biggest contract of my year, lettering the dedication signage for the new Crane STEM Center at Harmon High. Ceremony Saturday. Ted Crane's name, my gold. I was at her corner in 11 minutes, and I saw it from half a block. A bite taken out of the ledger. 2 full sections of pickets snapped off at the rail, splinters fanned into her zennias, tire tracks arcing off the asphalt and back onto it. Clean, no skid marks. You don't leave no skid marks by accident. And the span they'd hit wasn't random. The break started at 1984 and ended at 1987. Miss Bishop stood among the wreckage in her cardigan and her reading glasses, 76 years old, holding 1 snapped picket in both hands like a broken wing. Stapled to a surviving board beside her, crisp and cheerful, was a glossy flyer, a gift from the dedication committee, premium vinyl fencing, installed free for our parade route neighbors, maintenance free forever. They offered twice this month, she said, not looking up. I declined twice. Last night, apparently, the offer matured. She turned the picket over so I could read the name on it. Faded, careful, 17-year-old brushwork from 1985. And her voice went to a register I'd never once heard in 4 years of her classroom. "You'll want your conservation kit, Mr. Brody, not your paint. Nothing on this fence gets repainted. It gets saved." Miss Bishop, who did this? She looked down Willard Avenue toward the school, where a crane, the machine kind, was lowering his name into place above the new wing. "They didn't hit my fence, Mr. Brody," said my former teacher. "They hit the witness list." Her kitchen smelled like tea and pencil shavings, and 1 entire wall of what used to be the dining room was shelved floor to ceiling with grade books. 41 years of them, spines dated in white ink, every quiz and essay and absence of every student she ever taught. "You kept them all," I said. "I kept everything," said Miss Bishop. "Filing is how I pray." Then she laid it out for me the way she used to diagram a sentence, subject, verb, everything in its place. No mercy for the clause that thought it could hide. Saturday at 11, Harmon High becomes the Crane STEM Center. Ted Crane, class of '85, founder of Crane Water Systems, 600 jobs. The boy who cleaned the river cuts the ribbon while a film crew shoots the final scene of the documentary his foundation is funding about his life. And, per the business pages, while the Bellamy Group announces its acquisition of his company, a deal built, like everything else, on the founder's legend, the 17-year-old genius, the science fair, the famous 1985 notebook that sits in a glass case in his lobby. 3 weeks ago, Miss Bishop said, I told that film's producer, a serious young woman named Gwen Harlow, that before they locked the cut, I had a correction to the record. She scheduled me. Friday, 9 a.m. on camera. Her landline rang while the words were still in the air, and she answered and listened, and her face did not change, which is how I knew it was bad. I see. Yes, thank you for calling yourself Miss Harlow, instead of making an assistant do it. She hung up gently. My interview has been cut for time. The foundation funds the film. Time, it seems, is theirs. Tuesday. The interview died Tuesday, and the truck came through the class of 1985 Tuesday night, and Saturday was 4 days away. She climbed the step stool before I could offer, and brought down from the closet shelf a shoebox-sized carton, dust-furred, tied with actual string, and set it on the table like a reliquary. His name, she said, was Oscar Penn. Inside, a composition notebook, graph-ruled, water-stained at one corner, dense with a tight right-leaning hand, diagrams, columns, a filtration bed sketched over and over, refined page by page. A typed and handwritten class assignment, 6 pages, title underlined twice, My Filter, by Oscar Penn, and in the top corner, in red ink I'd have known anywhere, a circled A and the date. March 4th, 1985, photographs, a bus schedule, and one envelope, softened by 40 years of handling, addressed to Miss L. Bishop, Willard Ave. Oscar was Ted Crane's lab partner, she said. Scholarship kid, bust tables at the pantry nights. The filter was his, the design, the math, the 11 versions in that notebook. Ted had a father on the school board and an uncle with a law degree. Oscar couldn't get off work for the regional fair, so Ted presented alone, and won alone, and the write-up said Crane, and the patent application, 6 weeks later, said Crane. She straightened the notebook a 1/4 inch. Oscar came to me in this kitchen that fall. 19 years old. I told him we'd need his documentation, his parents, a lawyer we didn't have. And in February he hit black ice on County Road 12, and by summer his mother had sold the house, and she left this box with me, because, her words, I was the only one who ever told him he was brilliant. Her hands were perfectly still on the string. And then I stayed quiet, Mr. Brody, for 40 years while the wrong boy got a river named after him. She slid the envelope across. Oscar's last letter to her, that Christmas, 1 paragraph, and the final line has been living in my chest ever since. Mama says let it go. Some rivers you can't get clean. He was wrong about that, Miss Bishop said. It just takes a longer filter. She retied the string with a schoolteacher's bow, and stood and picked up her good coat off the chair like the matter was settled. Which, knowing her, it had been for weeks. Tomorrow morning you'll drive me to Deaton, Mr. Brody. There's someone I want you to meet. The someone taught 7th grade science at Deaton Middle School, and we found her after last bell in a classroom that smelled like vinegar volcanoes, stacking beakers with the efficient violence of a person whose day has already been long. Miss Ruiz? Miss Bishop said, from the doorway. Elena Ruiz? If this is about the field trip forms. She turned and stopped. Late 30s, dark hair fighting a pencil. And a face I'd been looking at for an hour without knowing it, because I'd been looking at photographs of her father. Miss Bishop didn't soften it, because Miss Bishop doesn't believe softening is a kindness. She introduced herself. She said the name, Oscar Penn, out loud, and watched Elena Ruiz set down a beaker very carefully. The way you set things down when your hands have stopped being trustworthy. And then she put the box on the lab bench and told her all of it. The filter, the fair, the patent, the ice on County Road 12. The mother who left town carrying Alana before Alana was anybody. The 40 years on a closet shelf. Alana listened the whole way through without once sitting down. When it was over, she looked at the box, and then at the old woman who'd brought it, and what came out of her was quiet, and it had edges. "I grew up on one photograph and the word smart," she said. "My mother wouldn't talk about this town. I teach the water cycle 11 miles from a river my father apparently cleaned, and I found out just now, from a stranger, at 40. She pulled the box 1 inch toward herself and stopped, like it was hot. "You kept my father in a box for 40 years, and you brought him to me the week he's useful." The room went very still. I started to say something, and Miss Bishop stopped me with 2 fingers and took it standing, the whole weight of it, chin level. "Yes," she said. "That is exactly what I did. I have no defense, and I'm not shopping for one. I was 36 and frightened of a school board, and then I was 46 and ashamed, and the shame compounded annually, like anything left untended." She laid one hand flat on the box, and then withdrew it, ceding the territory. "You may grade me as harshly as you like, Miss Ruiz. I'll co-sign the marks. But grade me later, because on Saturday at 11 they nail his invention over a door with the wrong name on it. Forever, on camera. And you are the only person alive with the standing to object. The box is yours either way. It always was. I only ran the archive." Elena Ruiz looked at the 2 of us, the teacher and the sign painter, the strangest delegation Deaton Middle had ever seen, and pulled the box the rest of the way across the bench and held it against her ribs like something recovered from water. "I teach at 7:40, she said. "Get out of my lab." But she kept the box. On the drive home, Miss Bishop watched the fields go by and said, to the window, "That went considerably better than I deserved." Wednesday morning I set up on Willard Avenue like a field hospital. Tenting, clamps, consolidant, my smallest brushes, and started saving the class of 1985, one snapped picket at a time. Conservation isn't painting. You don't touch the original hand, you stabilize it. Splice the broken wood from behind, and fill only where the name isn't. A neighbor kid watched me work a hairline crack through somebody's R for 20 minutes, and finally asked why I didn't just repaint it fresh. "I don't repaint hands," I told him. "I save them." At 9:40 my phone buzzed, the dedication committee. "Design update. Please add secondary line beneath donor name from his original 1985 design. Gold to match. Also, install deadline moved to Friday noon. Confirmed today." I sat on Miss Bishop's step and read it 4 times. They wanted me to letter the lie itself. Put the myth in my gold, in my hand, under his name. Forever, with a deadline moved up for good measure. Miss Bishop came out with 2 cups of tea and read it over my shoulder, and said nothing at all, which is the loudest thing she does. I typed the answer that cost me the biggest payday of my year, and I won't pretend my thumb didn't hover, declining the commission, effective now. I let her true things. Send. The reply took 19 minutes, and it didn't come by phone. A pearl gray Suburban rolled to the curb, and Ted Crane got out of it alone. 60 in the way that money is 60. Silver, open collar, the town's whole skyline in his posture, and walked the wreck of the fence line slowly, hands clasped behind him, like a man touring flood damage he'd read about. He stopped at my tenting. He looked at the splinted pickets, the names, my brushes. "Cal Brody," he said, warm as a ribbon cutting. "Your gutters kept the rain off my lobby for years. The Rotary Board, the Library Guild. Fine hand." He turned to the fence. "Terrible thing this. Kids, probably. You know, the committee's offer stands. She could have brand new vinyl by Friday. No charge, no upkeep. Vinyl never rots, Miss Bishop." She had come down the walk with her tea. She looked up at him. She'd taught him. I kept forgetting that. She'd had this man in the 3rd row when he was 17. And said, Pleasantly, neither does paper. Something crossed the great man's face, fast, like a fish under ice. Then the warmth came back on, and he said he hoped Saturday would make the whole town proud. All of it. Every generation. And he got back in the Suburban. And the last thing he did before it pulled away was look. Not at her. Not at me. At the box-shaped absence in her front window. Where anyone could see the closet had been emptied. He knows the box left the house, I said. He's known about the box for 40 years, said Miss Bishop. What's new is that it's moving. The courier came Thursday at 8:50 a.m. in a good suit, with a folder that had a law firm's name on it longer than a sentence. Emergency petition for Replevin. Crane Water Systems, Inc., demanding immediate surrender of the founding materials of the company, including the original 1985 laboratory notebook and associated documents, currently in the wrongful possession of Lenore Bishop and/or parties acting in concert. Surrender by 5 p.m. Thursday or face suit, plus the folder's last page, worded like a courtesy. A report to police regarding possession of stolen property. They were suing to confiscate the evidence 40 hours before the ceremony, and calling her the thief. Miss Bishop read all 9 pages at her kitchen table with a red pen in her hand out of pure muscle memory, and by the end, she had actually corrected 2 of their sentences in the margin. Then she picked up her address book, paper, alphabetized, 41 years deep, and made one call. Denise? Lenore Bishop. I need a lawyer by noon, and you were the best argument in the class of 1994. Pause. Yes, I remember the B+. Comma splices. Denise, I remember everything. That's rather the point. Denise Okafor-esque arrived at 11:40 with a legal pad and the specific joy of a woman who has waited 30 years to be called into a real fight by Lenore Bishop, and she read the Replevin petition once, and then read it again slower, and started to smile in a way I'd learned to trust. They drafted this angry, she said. Angry drafting leaves gifts. Look, paragraph 4. To claim the notebook, they had to define the notebook, the founding materials of the company. They just stipulated, in a court filing, that whatever's in that box is the origin of Crane Water Systems. She tapped it twice. So we won't fight about whether it matters. They've sworn it matters. We'll only fight about whose handwriting it's in. Which is when a Deaton Middle School parking permit pulled up outside, and Elena Ruiz came up the walk carrying a second box. Not Miss Bishop's box. A shoebox, older, floral, with her mother's rubber bands still on it. She set it on the kitchen table next to the first one and stood over the pair of them with her jaw tight and said, My mother kept his letters. Every one. I read them all last night, twice, and then I called in a sub for tomorrow. She lifted the lid. You should see March. Oscar pen to Rosa Ruiz, March 1985. Before the fair, before the write-up, before anybody's name was on anything. Pages of a 19-year-old boy in love and on fire. And folded into the second letter, sketched in the same tight right-leaning hand as the notebook, as the graded assignment, the filter, the bed layers labeled, the flow arrows. And under the sketch, one line that took the whole kitchen's air. I'm going to clean the whole river for you both. Both, dated 4 months before Alana was born. He knew. He drew his invention in a love letter to his pregnant girl and promised the river to the 2 of them. And then a school board's son took the river, and the ice took him, and the 2 of them had been living downstream of the theft for 40 years. Alina put her palm flat on the letter for a second, teacher steady, and when she looked up, she wasn't the woman who'd thrown us out of her lab. Okay, she said. How do we get his name back by Saturday? First, said Denise Okafor, checking her watch, we survived 5 o'clock. 5 o'clock came to Willard Avenue in the form of a squad car at 5:09, and the young officer who got out took one look at Miss Bishop on her porch and visibly aged. Miss Bishop, Officer Tran. Class of 2009. A beat. You were texting in Frost. Yes, ma'am. He held up the paperwork like a shield. It's a civil standby, ma'am. That's all. Their attorneys filed. We just have to document that the demand was made and refused. Nobody's arresting anybody today. And Denise came down the steps with our filed response in hand and walked him through it in 90 polite seconds. And Officer Tran documented the refusal. And on his way to the car, he paused at the wrecked section of fence, where his own name lived 8 feet farther down, and said, quietly, "Not really to us. My mom cried when I painted mine." He looked at the tire arc. No skid marks. I put that in a report Tuesday, for whatever it's worth. Crane's voicemail hit my phone at 6:22, and the ribbon-cutting warmth was gone out of it like water out of a cracked glass. "Mr. Brody, check your book of business sometime tonight. The Rotary sign, the Library Guild, the plant safety boards, the church directory, the 4 franchise jobs on Route 9. Every one of them crosses my table, son. Towns eat at my table. The committee's found a vinyl outfit for Saturday's banner, so your services won't be missed. What can still be missed is everything after. Walk away from that fence." I saved it, the way I'd learned from 4 days around Denise Okafor, and then I went back to the fence, because there was light left and the class of 85 wasn't going to splice itself. Elena stayed. That's the part of Thursday I'll keep. She came out at dusk with her sleeves pushed up and said, "Give me sandpaper and don't make it a ceremony," and we worked the broken run together under my shop lamps, and when we reached his picket, the cracked one, Oscar Pen 85 in 17-year-old brushwork, I clamped the splice and then put the infill brush in her hand instead of mine, and stood behind her, and steadied her wrist the way Miss Bishop once steadied mine, and Alina Ruiz painted 3/8 of an inch of background around her father's name, with her breath held the whole time. Miss Bishop watched from the porch. When we finally quit, she handed me a manila envelope, ancient, labeled in white ink Brody C. Junior Essay 2003, my own pages. And in the margin, in the red ink of 20 years ago, the note she'd written about me before I understood myself. "Sees everything. Says nothing. Fix, homework," said Miss Bishop, and went inside. Gwen Harlow called at 11:14 p.m., whispering from a parking lot. The Foundation had ordered the film's archival unit to pull and destroy the 1985 Science Fair B-roll and stills. All of it. Tonight, before picture lock. "I thought you should know what they're afraid of," she said. There was a photo in the old school paper files. Local fair. Before regionals. I saw a contact sheet reference, and then the folder was empty. Miss Bishop, roused in her dressing gown, listened to this with her head tilted, and then said the sentence that broke Thursday open. "Empty there, perhaps. I ran that dark room for 30 years. The attic. Steel file boxes, negatives in glass scene, contact sheets by year, her white ink on every spine. 1985 spring, and there it was, frame after frame on one strip, the local fair, the gymnasium, a display board titled Pen, Crane Water Filtration, Pen First, and in front of it, pointer in hand, mid-explanation, alive, Oscar Pen, with Ted Crane standing half a step behind like a man at someone else's board. "The paper never ran this one," Miss Bishop said. Her thumb hovered over the frame without touching it. The principal preferred the regional photograph. Ted alone, with the trophy. And I, the pause, was the longest I ever heard her take. I was the advisor. "I didn't just stay quiet, Mr. Brody. I chose the photograph." She closed the glass scene with both hands, gently, like closing a door on a sleeping child. "So, we'll let it run now. 40 years late is still turned in. Friday, we built the case the way Miss Bishop built a syllabus. Nothing decorative, everything load-bearing, due dates non-negotiable. Denise called it the handwriting triangle, and she drilled us on it like a closing argument. Here is point 1. The graded assignment, My Filter, by Oscar Penn, March 4, 1985. Red ink day. Logged that same week in the 1985 gradebook in Miss Bishop's ledger hand. A contemporaneous school record predating the fair by 6 weeks. Here is point 2. The love letters, the same hand, the same filter. Sketched in March and promised to a family, held 40 years by a woman with no dog in the fight. Point 3. And this was Denise's favorite. The one she kept touching like a lucky coin. The picket. Oscar Penn 85, painted by the boy himself, in public, on the parade route, weathering in plain sight for 4 decades. Chain of custody, provenance, and a public exemplar, she said. The best evidence in this town is nailed to Willard Avenue, and half the county has photographed it at parades. Let his lawyers argue with a fence. My job was the gymnasium easel of it all. In my shop, I made enlargements the way sign painters do. Big, clean, mounted on board. The contact sheet frame of Oscar at the pen, crane display, blown up to poster size. The graded first page of My Filter beside the matching notebook page. The letter sketch. Exhibits you could read from the back row of a crowd, because Denise had looked at our situation. No courtroom before Saturday, no airtime guaranteed, and named the venue out loud. Then we try it on the lawn. Gwen Harlow came at 9 after all, off the clock, 1 camera, no crew, her job in her hands, and filmed Miss Bishop's correction at the kitchen table with a gradebook wall behind her. All of it. 40 minutes. The theft and the ice and the photograph and the shame. At the end, Gwen sat back and said, I can't promise you the premiere. The foundation owns the cut. She capped the lens. But nobody owns my footage of this morning. I can promise the record. At 4, we went to see the superintendent. Dr. Marcus Hastings, class of 1988, had Miss Bishop's old hall pass framed on his office wall, which told you everything about the war inside him, because out his window, the crane stem center letters were being bolted over the door of the school he ran. He listened to Denise for 10 minutes, with his hands steepled and sweat at his collar. And then he was honest, which I'll give him forever. You're asking me to detonate the largest gift in district history, on camera, at its own dedication, in front of the donor's acquisition partners. He looked at the folder like it was ticking, because it was. His attorneys called twice today. The word stolen property was used about your box. If I put a microphone anywhere near this and it wobbles, it's my career and the district's endowment in the same crater. He stood and looked out at the crane lowering the last letter, and I watched the class of 88 fight the superintendent to a draw. The ceremony runs on my podium and my agenda. So bring me something his lawyers can't melt by 10:59. Miss Okafor, paper, hands, dates, teacher proof. The way she used to want it. He glanced at Miss Bishop, and 20+ years fell off his face for a second. You'll know my answer by whether I let you up the steps. That night, we finished the fence. The class of 1985 stood whole again under my lamps, spliced, consolidated, every name saved in its own hand. The section may be 2 shades cleaner than its neighbors. The way truth is. Alana walked the restored run slowly with her fingertips just off the wood. Name after name after name. All her father's classmates. All the people who'd have been her aunts and uncles of the ordinary kind, and stopped at his picket, and stood there a long time. Miss Bishop, she said finally, without turning around, about the grade you told me to hold. Miss Ruiz, 40 years late, Alina said, is still turned in. She turned around. You get today's mark, not 1985's. Don't argue with me. I'm a teacher too. Miss Bishop received that standing, chin level, the way she'd received the fury 3 days before. and if her eyes did something behind the reading glasses, the porch light was kind enough to keep it between them. Alana walked me to my truck after, past 600 feet of names, and stood at the tailgate with sawdust on her forearms and her father's paint under one nail, and looked at me the way she'd looked at the box, like something she was deciding whether to pull closer. Saturday, when this is over, I started. "Show your work first," said Alana Ruiz, science teacher, and squeezed my wrist once. Hard. Brush steadying pressure, and drove back to Deaton to sleep 3 hours before the longest morning of both our lives. Saturday came up brass band bright, and Willard Avenue filled by 9, folding chairs, strollers, the parade stepping off at 10:15 to walk its 40-year route past the fence toward the school, where a stage, a ribbon, and 300 seats waited under a banner I hadn't lettered. The banner was vinyl, machine cut, kerning like a ransom note, Crane STEM Center in a typeface no human hand ever loved. My replacement. It hung over the doors slightly crooked, and I want to tell you that didn't give me a mean little spark of joy. But I lettered true things. We took our position the way Denise had drawn it up, not storming anything, invited nowhere. Standing at the front rank of the public lawn with a sign painter's easel, covered, and a wagon of mounted boards, covered, and the 2 boxes, and the 1985 gradebook in Miss Bishop's arms, like a hymnal. Officer Tran worked the rope line and did not see us extremely professionally. Gwen's crew was up front shooting the official version. Gwen herself drifted to the side aisle with her own camera, off the books. At 11, Ted Crane took the podium to a full standing ovation, 600 jobs applauding their own paychecks, and he was good, folksy, humble, the river, the town, the boy with a dream. And then he did the thing he has done at every telling for 40 years, the thing his whole legend is load-bearing on, the thing that walked him straight onto our nail. He held up the notebook, the lobby relic, the glass case original, raised over his head like a torch. It started with this. Ted Crane told 300 people and 2 film cameras, and the Bellamy Group's front row. A 17-year-old kid and a composition book. Everything we built came out of these pages. Beside me, very quietly, in the voice she used to use for "put the phone away," "I won't ask twice." Miss Bishop said, "Yes, Ted, it did." And she handed me her teacup, straightened her cardigan, and stood up out of her folding chair into the middle of his applause. 2 security men in dedication polos started toward her before she'd cleared the 3rd row, and that's when Dr. Marcus Hastings, class of 1988, superintendent of schools, leaned into the podium's 2nd microphone and settled his own career with 9 words. Let her speak. I owe her a late essay. A laugh went through the crowd. Half the lawn had owed her one, and the laugh carried her all the way up the steps, which I believe Hastings knew it would. Crane's smile stayed bolted on. He even pulled the microphone toward her himself, magnanimous, playing to the cameras. Miss Bishop taught us all, though I think we can forgive a confused scrapbook or 2 on a big. She let the sentence die of exposure. She set the 1985 gradebook on the podium, unhurried, and opened it to a ribbon page, and looked out at 300 people and delivered 4 words into a silence so complete that the only sound on that lawn was the flag rope ticking against the pole. I graded the original. Nobody breathed. The rope ticked twice more. "Pen, Oscar," she read, finger on the ledger line. "My filter, submitted March 4th, 1985, grade A." 6 weeks before the science fair, in this book, in my hand, in his. She lifted the graded assignment in its sleeve and held it beside the relic notebook still frozen in Crane's fist. 2 documents. Ted, same diagrams. Same tight right-leaning hand. Read them aloud for the cameras if you like. A beat with a whole career inside it. You wrote neither. I pulled the cover off the easel. Poster size. Gallery clean, 40 years developing. The gymnasium, 1985. The display board reading pen, Crane water filtration, and Oscar pen front and center with the pointer in his hand, mid-sentence, explaining his river to the world. Ted Crane, half a step behind, at someone else's board. The crowd made a sound I have never heard a crowd make, a single low vowel, 300 people revising 40 years at once. And Elena Ruiz walked up the steps. "My name is Elena Ruiz," she said, and her teacher's voice reached the last row without the microphone's help. "I teach 7th grade science in Deaton. And I'm Oscar Penn's daughter." She held up the letter, the March letter, the sketch. 4 months before I was born, my father drew this filter in a letter to my mother and promised he'd clean the whole river for us both. He bussed tables. He hit black ice. He never saw me, or a dime, or his own name on his own work. She turned deliberately and pointed down Willard Avenue, down the parade route every person on that lawn had walked an hour before. And if any lawyer here wants to argue about handwriting, his is nailed to that fence, where he painted it himself, in public, in 1985. It's been evidence for 40 years. Go read the fence. People did. That's the part the documentary kept. Heads turning, then phones, then actual bodies. A stream of them peeling off the lawn toward the corner lot, while the ceremony stood open-mouthed on its own stage. Denise Okafor stepped up last, unhurried, lawyer calm, and drove the nail his own counsel had milled. One housekeeping note for the Bellamy Group's front row. On Thursday, Crane Water Systems filed an emergency petition describing the materials on this podium as, quote, "the founding materials of the company." "We agree completely." She smiled at Crane's lawyers the way you smile at a gift. "They're the founding materials of the company. We've simply read the handwriting." Crane fought, because men like that always get one more round. It was a team effort, a group project, and then, when the vowel from the crowd turned against him, the ice cracked all the way through and the thing underneath came up. I was the group. I built 600 jobs out of that gym. The boy's been dead 40 years. What did he ever build? "Me," said Elena Ruiz into the microphone, one word. And that was the ball game. The Bellamy row was already standing, already buttoning jackets, already regretting the flight. Hastings took the podium, gray but steady, and tabled the naming resolution on the spot, and the school board, I watched Denise count them. 4 of the 7 were on that fence somewhere, voted by voice, in public, to rescind. Pending a name this district can grade honestly. Crane got one exit line, hissed past Miss Bishop on the stairs, "You'll be a footnote by Monday." "Footnotes," said Miss Bishop, "are where the sources live." The after, in her red ink, concise, corrected, final. Bellamy walked away Monday morning. Founder provenance risk, their statement said. Which his lawyer for the notebook wasn't his. The plant survived him. The board that stayed knew where the 600 jobs actually came from, and it wasn't the myth. The driver of the truck came forward Wednesday. Once Officer Tran's no-skid report met my teal paint match met a subpoena for his phone. A fleet supervisor. Sick about it for days, and his text thread went where text threads go, and the district attorney is now studying the modern Ted Crane. The one who ordered a fence hit, and archives burned and filed suit to seize a dead boy's homework, because 40-year-old theft is beyond the law's reach, but last Tuesday isn't. Gwen Harlow's film comes out in the spring, recut top to bottom. It's called The Filter now. The last shot, I'm told, is the fence. The wing opened in September as the Oscar Penn Science Center, and if you think there was a dry eye when they unveiled the lettering, my hand, my gold, his name, no charge. You've never watched a town apologize. The first Oscar Penn Prize went to a 7th grader from Deaton, a quiet girl with a stream turbidity project whose science teacher cried in the 2nd row and denied it in the parking lot. At the opening, Miss Bishop read Oscar's last letter aloud, once, the whole of it, steady until the river line. And then she folded it and put it in Alana's hands, for keeps. Primary sources belong with family, she said. I only ever ran the archive. And in June, first time since she retired, the seniors came back to Willard Avenue. Miss Bishop sat on the porch in judgment and lemonade, while the class of this year painted their names one picket at a time down the new stretch I'd primed. The fence growing again like it had never stopped, and Elena stood at the 85 section with her hand beside her father's picket, in the crowd of names that should have been her family. Finally, part of the ledger. I'd brought her something. Shop made, gold leaf on black, hand-lettered. The best small work I've ever done. M.S. Ruiz, Science, for a classroom door in Deaton, and underneath, in 1-inch letters only she would be close enough to read, Ask me anything. Elena Ruiz read it twice, and looked at me the way she'd looked at March, and said, full marks. From the porch, without lowering her lemonade, Miss Bishop called, for the record, I told you both the same sentence. There's someone I want you to meet. I said it to him on Tuesday, and to you on the telephone Wednesday night, and I never specified which of you I was saying it to. Because a good assignment works from either end. She sipped. 40 years for one introduction. Grade inflation? Honestly, here's what I know now, and then the pen's yours. Teachers are the town's archive. They keep the grade books, the negatives, the true first drafts of everybody. And some of them carry a correction for 40 years, waiting for 1 week brave enough to submit it. So, 2 questions, and I read every comment like she read essays, all the way through, twice. If it had been your name on that contract, the biggest job of your year, gold leaf on a lie, deadline Friday noon, would you have kept lettering or put down the brush knowing exactly what it would cost you? And which teacher saw something in you before you could see it yourself? The one whose red ink, or nudge, or 1-inch brush changed your whole direction, and who you never went back to thank? Put their name in the comments. Miss, Mr., Coach, whoever held your wrist steady. Then find out if they're still around, and go. Fences get repaired. So do silences. And if you stayed with me all the way to the last picket, subscribe. This channel is for the ones who say the true names.